country makes the best sunscreen, and should you be switching to save your skin? Hello, Internet! Welcome to Style Theory, the show that won't let a little sun damage ruin the tour. You know, the world tour of sunscreens. Listen, it's that time of year again. The weather's getting warmer, the sun's getting brighter, and even the vampires are venturing out into the world to melt away those winter blues. And that means that it's time once again to talk about sunscreen. It's become a bit of a yearly tradition for us here on Style Theory to put sunscreen products to the test. We've tested whether sunscreen actually works, whether sunscreen gels, mousses, or milks are better at keeping away the burn. And now it's time to complete the trilogy. If you've lived in or visited the US and tried our sunscreens, or you just follow a lot of skincare news online, you'll know that American sunscreen has a bit of a reputation of being, how do I put this? Bad. They're bad. They're goopy, they leave a white ashy residue on your skin, and they feel awful under your makeup. But apparently that's not the norm in other parts of the world, which made me wonder, which country has actually mastered sun protection? And what does that mean in terms of keeping you melanoma-free? Today, I'm going on a journey across the globe to answer the big questions. Why is American sunscreen so trash? How have other countries upped their sunscreen game? And what can you do to get the most from your sunscreen? So get your passports ready, loyal theorists, as we head out on Style Theory's Sunscreen World Tour. We're starting our tour in my home country of America. Because to know what everyone else is apparently doing right, we need to know what Americans are doing wrong. And we're gonna write it all down in our handy-dandy travel journal. This will give us a way to score the rest of the world. In the US, sunscreen is treated as an over-the-counter drug. And like all drugs, they're regulated by the FDA. You know, the Food and Drug Administration. It's their job to decide what ingredients are safe and effective enough to go in our sunscreens. In total, the FDA has identified 16 different chemicals that are effective filters against the sun. Specifically, it's UV rays. Yes, technically there's a 17th ingredient called mexoryl excess, but that one is only allowed to be used by L'Oreal. So it's not really important to today's episode. But hey, if let's say 500 people subscribe right now, we will make a short about it. It's all up to you. Now, you may be thinking, wow, 16 ingredients? That sounds like a lot. Well, spoiler alert, it's not. That number is actually painfully small compared to the rest of the world. Heck, even Canada has 19 on their list. And that's a country where some areas don't even get sun for a full month. And we all know it's not the skin cancer you have to worry about when there's 30 days of night. You get me? Anyway, the reason that the US has so few ingredients is that the approval process is extremely slow and expensive. Yeah, the FDA hasn't approved a new ingredient since 1999, which is way before a lot of you watching this video were born. And it's not because companies aren't trying either. But since there are so few ingredients approved for use in the US, it means that all of our sunscreen options are pretty much the same thing in a different package. And worse, because yes, my fellow Americans, it gets worse. Of those 16 ingredients, only half of them are regularly used in modern sunscreens. Whether it's due to the ingredient's inefficiency or its big reputation, it means that US sunscreens are pretty much forced to use the same stuff. But this lack of variety doesn't just make our sunscreens feel goopy, it makes them weak. If you saw our previous sunscreen episode, you'll know that there are two main types of UV radiation, UVA and UVB. UVB is responsible for sunburns and most types of skin cancer, while UVA is the one that causes signs of aging, aka the one that makes your skin leathery and full of wrinkles. And here's the kicker. SPF, you know, that number we use to measure the quality of protection that we're getting, it only measures how well the product protects against UVB, not UVA. So even if a sunscreen has high SPF, it may do nothing to protect your skin from the aging effects of UVA. Yeah, not good. And of those 16 approved ingredients, only a few actually provide extensive coverage against UVA. And in case you're just sitting there thinking, it's fine, one or two more wrinkles, no big. Let me just show you this. A photo of a man who spent nearly 30 years as a truck driver, where one side of his body got way more sun than the other. I'll let you guess which is which, and you only get one guess. If a sunscreen can protect against both UVA and UVB, then it's allowed to call itself broad spectrum, which isn't exactly specific. I mean, how broad is that protection? The world may never know. Thankfully, the US does require all sunscreens above SPF 15 to pass a broad spectrum test, but that test isn't as thorough as other countries. In fact, only about 35% of US sunscreens would actually pass the UVA standards of Europe. Speaking of which, I think we have a pretty thorough checklist of US sunscreen failures to judge other countries by, which means it's finally time to head out on our sunscreen world tour to find out what the US can do to up its sunscreen game. At each stop, we'll take a look at what each country is doing right to hopefully help fix what we are doing wrong. Oh, that's my flight. Let's go. My first stop, Europe, home of Alexander McQueen, Boots, and I know there's another really important export here. It's right on the tip of my tongue. Oh, right, Tom Holland. Love that guy. Okay, Amy, focus. No more thoughts of Spider-Man. We are here for one reason and one reason only: sunscreen. Right off the bat, there's one huge difference between Europe and the US. And it's not the accent. It's the drugs. Yeah, unlike the US, who regulates sunscreen like a pharmaceutical, Europe treats it as a cosmetic. I know, wild, right? As a result, the approval process for ingredients is much simpler and way faster. Europe has roughly 30 ingredients compared to the US's 16. This list includes super effective UV filters like BEMT or B-motrizinol, which, in actuality, companies in the US have been trying to get approved for over 20 years. Oof. Europe is also great at banning ingredients that were once used, but over time, modern science has proven to be more harmful than good. Ingredients like para-aminobenzoic acid, or PABA for short. It was one of the first UV filters to hit the market, but now we know that it can, increase the likelihood of UV damage from the sun. Ugh, yikes. Glad to know that no one is dumb enough to still use this, right? No. Wow. Well, at least most companies don't use it anymore, and the FDA may give it the boot soon-ish. Moving on. The EU and the UK also make the whole UVA and UVB protection much easier to understand. In the EU, they have this symbol that clearly shows the product protects against UVA. At least more clearly than broad spectrum, anyway. But it doesn't just tell you what it protects you from, it also gives you an idea of how protective it is. In order to use this symbol, a sunscreen has to have a UVA protection that's at least 1/3 as good as its UVB. And it's good to know that this is also the same threshold that you'll find used in some countries in South America, as well as some African nations. And back in the UK, some companies even go a step further. The UK company Boots has a whole 1 to 5 star rating system based on how well it protects against UVA relative to the UVB. See, I knew I liked you, Boots. So clearly, Europe is on to something. Not only do their laws make it easier for new ingredients to be approved, they also make it easier for harmful ingredients to be removed. Plus, their UVA circles and star systems are way easier for the everyday person to understand. So let's make a note of that in our handy-dandy travel journal. And while that's all great, it's only part of what we are hoping to uncover. Now that we know how to improve the approval process, what about the sensation?
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now boarding flight 1105 to Asia.
Oh, that's us! On to stop number 2 of the Sunscreen World Tour. Asia has become famous for its skin products, especially its sunscreens. They're light, they don't leave a white cast, and they feel nice under your makeup. It's like magic. How did they do it while the US can't? Like we saw in Europe, sunscreens in Asia are also treated like cosmetics. And they're approved for a whole CVS receipt size list of UV filters. A list that kind of makes the FDA's list look tiny tiny by comparison. What is this? A list for ants? In South Korea alone, they have 30 approved UV filters. And if you hop on over to the Philippines, they have 33. And then you have Japan with their humble list of 34 UV filters. Whoa! I can't believe it either. But it's not just their list that puts the US to shame. They've also developed what they call their PA system, a system that lets you know the absolute level of protection that you are getting with that product, not just the relative UVA and UVB levels. Okay, Japan, noted and goated. And while all that is great, don't get me wrong, the real win for Asian sunscreens is the rest of the ingredients, which means that the manufacturers in Japan were able to cook. Many Asian sunscreens are made using a water, alcohol, or gel base. This leads to sunscreens that are less goopy and that go on more sheer than ones found in the US. Or, let's be real, even ones in the UK or EU. However, it's not all good news. While these sunscreens feel great on your skin, the watery nature causes one major downside. You've probably heard the saying, oil and water don't mix. But do you know what does mix well with water? More water! Which means that most of these water-based sunscreens don't hold up too well when exposed to even more water. Yeah, if you're going to the beach or a water park, these are probably not the best options. But for regular everyday use, they are pretty sweet. Actually, let me write that down in our handy-dandy travel journal. Now, if say you are planning to go out and rough it in the wild, and you need a sunscreen made to match the harsh conditions that you may face, well, we have one more stop that may just hold the answer to saving your skin. Welcome to the land down under, where sunscreens are as tough as the kangaroos. Australia has the strictest sunscreen regulations in the world. And there's a good reason why. Skin cancer. Now, skin cancer is a big deal everywhere and way more dangerous than most people tend to realize. No, really, take care of your skin. And according to the World Health Organization, Australia has the highest rate of skin cancer per 100,000 people of any country on Earth. And its neighbor New Zealand is number 4. So, as you can rightly imagine, Australia takes its sunscreen very seriously and is the only other country outside of the US to treat sunscreen as a drug, not a cosmetic. But don't get too happy about that yet, America, because Australia does it better. Australian sunscreen manufacturers have 30 approved UV filter ingredients, and they aren't playing about it either. You might have seen those bottles that say that they have SPF 100 and make you think that they are super strong. Yeah, that ish doesn't fly in Australia. Any sunscreens that have an SPF over 60 are given a generic 50+ rating. Why? Well, once SPF gets that high, people start to get a little too confident and start thinking that they don't need to reapply as instructed. Reminder, you do need to reapply as instructed to stay safe all day long, no matter what country your sunscreen is from. Anyway, if you're someone who's looking to spend a day at the beach going in and out and in and out and in and out of the ocean, and you need a sunscreen that's going to hold up to that barrage of water, look no further. Australian sunscreen is your new bestie. To be labeled as water resistant in Japan, Korea, or even the EU, sunscreen has to be tested after being submerged in water for 40 to 80 minutes. And if it's still found to have at least 50% of that original SPF protection, it's finally allowed to call itself water resistant. But not in Australia, baby! If a sunscreen dares to call itself water resistant, it has to be able to maintain 100% of the original SPF protection. And to America's credit, that is also the standard we use in the US. See, sometimes we can do things right. Sometimes. Anyway, in Australia, they have taken this idea even further, where you can now find sunscreens approved to be water resistant for up to 4 hours. Yeah, there are sunscreens in Australia where you can submerge yourself in water for up to 4 hours and be just as protected as before you got wet. Although, again, please reapply for safety. Every 2 hours is best. Thank you. Now, there's one other thing Australia does to maximize its sunscreen safety, and it surprisingly surprisingly has nothing to do with the actual sunscreen. If you grew up in the US or some other countries, you may remember all those PSAs we had to sit through in school about how smoking and drugs are bad. Well, Australia takes those to the extreme, and they do it to promote sun safety. It starts pretty simple with things like their no hat, no play motto, which encourages kids to wear hats when they play outside. And then they evolve into things like this musical number.
Slip, slop, slap, seek and slide, have fun outside, but don't get fried.
Which, I have to say, it's pretty catchy. I've been singing it for a few days. It's an earworm. However, this catchy song has nothing on their other PSA tactic, scaring you into never setting foot outside ever again.
Tanning is skin cells in trauma, trying to protect themselves from cancer. But a melanoma just 1 millimeter deep can get into your bloodstream and spread, often in your lung, liver, or brain. There's nothing healthy about a tan.
Okay, we get it. Unfiltered sun plus unprotected skin equals bad. But where does this leave us and our goal to make American sunscreen better? The more I looked into how every other country does their sunscreen, I found myself feeling a little burned. America's super slow and archaic system of approving sunscreen ingredients hasn't just fallen behind the rest of the world, it's put people at risk and done it without them ever realizing that they should be worrying in the first place. It failed us. Whether it's the EU's easy-to-understand categories, Asia's superior feel, Australia's tough-as-nails regulations, or even just the plain number of ingredients, America has gotten stuck with the worst possible options. However, there is some hope, thanks to the internet. If you live in America or any other country and want to get your hands on something like Japan's highly rated Biore UV Aqua Rich Watery Essence Sunscreen for your makeup routine, or happen to need something strong enough for the Aussie sun like Body Sand's SPF 50 lotion, there are plenty of sites to help you. Ones like Care to Beauty, Yes Style, and Chemistry Warehouse, to name a few. And no, we're not sponsored, but these sites allow you to buy whatever international sunscreens work for your needs, provided you're willing to pay a little bit of a premium to get them shipped here. Capitalism. Whee! But if you can't or don't want to spend big for stuff that, let's be real, should already be in America, just hold on a second, because there is hope on the horizon. Many American politicians have started speaking out about how backwards the US is when it comes to our sunscreen. And there was one other thing that made some big changes when it comes to how we approve our ingredients. And that was COVID. Yeah, I'm not kidding. When the US passed the CARES Act back in 2020, besides all of the COVID-related things it changed, it also reformed the FDA rules around approving over-the-counter drugs, including the US's favorite drug, sunscreen. In theory, this should make the process of approving or removing ingredients from our sunscreens much faster in the future, but only time will tell. In the meantime, please wear your sunscreen every day, stay out of direct sun when possible, and remember, that's just a theory, a style theory. Don't get burned. Coming up next on Style Theory.
I'm working late, 'cause I'm a theorist. My skin is burnt to a crisp.